Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at some of the most interesting artwork that I've kind of come across, okay? A lot of the images inside of here will be from either Frank Miller, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, or someone along those lines. You know, sometimes you'll have to kind of forgive me a little bit. I don't know who drew some of these images, but I just picked these up off of Google Images, typing in something like Frank Miller's panel layouts and such like that. Basically, right here we can see an image that Frank Miller had for Sin City. And notice how he's able to imply that they are in a setting with a ton of minimalism. This whole railing here is all just white, just pure and simple white. There's just so much minimalism in a lot of Frank Miller's work. It's not that elaborate, but it has a very interesting stylistic appeal to it, something that just grabs your eye. And that's some of the interesting thing that I've noticed is where a comic book artist needs to make really fast decisions in order to output something like a comic book every single month to hit their deadlines. Now, it's safe to say that as they're drawing, they're making really quick, very bold decisions, and then later find that the composition doesn't render well for a really well fleshed out background, or that other details are not going to quite work as well as initially thought, primarily because of how you've cross-hatched a specific area. And it doesn't matter if you're doing it in pencils or what have you. If you have to erase a whole bunch of stuff in order to compensate, in order to make more detail elsewhere, then basically that's extra work, that's extra effort that you have to go through. And so what I've found is just leaning in to the bold, interpretive sort of way that you've already started to map out your drawing, how you've started to render it. Lean into your initial bold decisions, and sometimes it leads into having backgrounds very much like this. And really, one of the things that I would caution people, like, Frank Miller is a great artist, but sometimes I hear his advice and it's like, yeah, that was great when you were young and you were doing it correctly. Such as Sin City, when he was doing his Daredevil run, that was kind of the peak of his career. The Dark Knight Returns. The Dark Knight Returns #2 was not a worthy successor to, or sequel or anything. All-Star Batman and Robin was not a true prequel to The Dark Knight Returns. So, in my perception of events, people can say that these three comics are related, but they can't be. Around that period of time, Dark Knight Returns #2, that's when Frank Miller's career kind of went down the deep end, and his artwork has progressively looked worse and worse and worse. Even his writing is just as sloppy as his artwork. But back when he made Sin City and The Dark Knight Returns, that was his prime. Silhouettes, the use of silhouettes is very powerful in Frank Miller's work. And not only that, but he likes to render things with a massive amount of minimalism so that they're damn near being just a silhouette. You know, the strange thing about this first panel is it could very easily be the cover of a romance magazine, and no one would ever know better. And even with the amount of minimalism that's in this first panel, I bet you if it was the cover to a romance novel, it would sell like pancakes. It would sell rather well. But yeah, to kind of continue a thought that I just realized I never completed, one of the things that Frank Miller says is one of his favorite things to do is to just fill up a brush full of, be it white paint or whiteout, and just flicking it at the page in order to create these streaks which make rain. And that's kind of cool, you know? Rain is unpredictable, so using that method, if it helps, totally makes sense in order to make these watery streaks. Not only that, but motion lines. You gotta kind of think about motion lines. You can't overuse them, but if characters are in the rain, you kind of have something that can help you guide the eye interestingly throughout the composition of your multiple panels on your page. Technically speaking, I think that the rain should have been going this direction, but I don't know. It all depends. So panel number 2 is kind of interesting because it almost feels as though he just made the silhouette of both of them in white and then just kind of filled in. I mean, it just feels like he may have even started with just his inks in order to render out his scene, and just maybe filled in the gaps later on down the road, be it with black ink or white ink or what have you. Very fascinating how he pulled this off. And the layout itself, one really big panel. This is kind of like an establishing shot right here. And typically I call the biggest panel on the page the capital letter. Now, I don't know if any professional comic book artists consider it that or even use that term, but that's just what I'm going to use within the course of my videos, kind of looking over comic book pages. An establishing shot tells you everything about where they are, okay? You get the sense that they're in the rain, they're outside, and they're on a balcony or a porch or something along those lines, just from this first panel. And how many backgrounds are actually drawn inside of this image? That's an interesting question. Well, just one. See how he got away with that? He doesn't even need to go through the effort of creating this fence again and all of that. He doesn't have to worry about even doing the work that would be involved with this with white ink or anything like that. He wouldn't have to do that. It's not necessary. Very minimalistic, but very, very appealing. And I think that if you can get away with minimalism with a very appealing stylistic look, it can potentially get it so that you can finish a comic book much sooner than most people. But I also think that it might actually be more appealing than the alternative. Look at this. Just look at this, okay? You know that he's holding a gun here, and yet his hand is enshrouded in white. The gun is enshrouded in white. And yet the silhouettes of these two objects are still very readable. And just the way he renders this smoke, it's fascinating. Frank Miller, during his prime, this was a great image that he has made. Okay, the thing that I like about this panel layout, and yet again, this is Frank Miller again. This is from Sin City once again as well. Some of his best work was done when he was working on Sin City, and you know it's a very simple panel layout. His whole page is just this big, and he just split it in two. But notice how he split it in two. Now, for all intents and purposes, this whole region of canvas that's covered in red here, that's all the first panel or something along those lines. But generally it makes the transition from when you're looking at this image to this image, it kind of confuses you. But then again, there comes this point where it has this gutter or the actual line of separation on the panel, okay? He has this which clips out this shadow, and it just makes it look so graphically designed, the way that it does that. Once again, there's only one background. There's water right here. It looks like they're on the docks because there's these wooden plank or pillars going through here, and you know he made a point to make these white lines going through here. So this has to be wood. So yeah, they're by a lake or a rather large mass of water. I do find it weird that the water isn't visible through here though, from this camera angle. If I may be allowed to offer a critique to a master back during his prime. What's interesting is that this first composition, it has a theme, and it is darkness. And I would assume that it's in darkness because he just barely pulled the trigger. Light hasn't quite completely filled the aperture of the camera lens or something like that. And then here it's shrouded in light down below, almost like a yin-yang. The design of a yin-yang is always kind of interesting to look at. I've always thought that was a cool design, or any variation that you might come up with. You look at this page and you can totally see it. It's so well executed. and look at how little detail he was able to get away with. I mean, look at these bold motion lines here with the clothing. Notice how there is no actual line for his legs here. There's no rendering in specific locations. He didn't draw a line here, yet every time that he drew any of the waves inside of the ocean, he started it here, probably with a brush full of ink. Very fascinating how he pulled this off. It's more graphic design than it is an actual formal drawing, which I find rather interesting. Using graphic design instead of using perspective and trying to work out a scene, it seems so counter everything that has to do with how I understand doing artwork. But if Frank Miller can pull it off, that's amazing. That's great. Okay, so here is a double-page spread. I believe this is from a comic book that Frank Miller worked on, and it's Ronin, I believe. That's the name of the comic book. Now, I have not read this issue, but there are a number of comic book artists that have started to do this more frequently. During the 1990s, it became really frequent and kind of done to death. But there's a lot of really cool things here. You know, you got a super wide panel that goes all the way through 2 pages, and it portrays these interesting soldiers that kind of look like they have baskets over their heads, which, I mean, that sounds hilarious. I'm like, you put a basket on their head. Like, I've never read the comic book, so I don't know what this is, but, you know, you look at something like the Knights of Ren and the way that they've been designed, they kind of look like this. Yeah, I mean, look at that. This is awesome here. He's holding a lot of different arrows. So, you know, most of the time we picture a soldier with, you know, a quiver of arrows on his back, but that they don't, typically they would carry, yes, they would carry some in here, but they would wind up grabbing about 4 or 5 arrows in their hand, so that as they pull their bow up, and his arm would be something like right here, okay? His other arm could quickly grab one of those arrows in his hand and then pull the string back. It's winding up being really scribbly. I don't know if it's making sense, but the idea is it's a lot faster to pull an arrow out of your other hand than it is to pull it out of your quiver. And, you know, when you're doing acrobatics and stuff, there is a possibility that arrows could actually fall out of the quiver, especially if you jump and, you know, you crouch down when you fall. You could lose arrows that way. And so I really appreciate his ability to do research. Everything that he's done, he did 300, he did Ronin, everything that he draws, it's all well researched. All the way down to how this soldier is holding arrows. It's phenomenal. And then we kind of come down here, and we just have a bunch of panels that by and large, except for this one right here, these panels are all the same size. I don't know, maybe the panel is the same size, it's just that this foreshortened portion of the page makes it look like it's more narrow. But let's see, there are 9 panels for these 2 pages. And look at that. He didn't need to draw out, like there's no real establishing shot, except the use of blue gets you to just think they're out in the wilderness. There is no background drawn out a single time on this double page spread. I do think it would have been nice to see some rendering of the ground and maybe something throughout here, kind of flesh the place out a little bit. Maybe some trees and stuff, maybe a mountain out here, just something. But with the minimalism, like I said, Frank Miller was a minimalist in a lot of ways, and he just dealt with these cross-hatched silhouettes and just leaned into just lightly interpreting the scene. It kind of makes looking at this almost kind of dreamlike, and it makes you wonder if this was translated into film, how would the camera capture this particular moment in the script? It fascinates me. Like, how would they do it? Would they actually use CGI for that scene? I want to know. Okay, here's a panel or a page or 2, double page spread of Frank Miller. Okay, for the comic book 300. I mean, just look at that. I don't know what's going on with all of these silhouettes up here, but I'm sure that if I had read the entire comic book, I would know. But it looks, as I'm looking at it, it looks like these are this is the silhouette of a Spartan right here, and this is his bow over here, and he's ready to shoot. And there's another Spartan right here with a bow, and he's ready to shoot. And then another one right here. You know, this is actually kind of phenomenal right here, because I think right here what we have is like the silhouette of someone's hand right here, and from a first-person perspective, this is his fist right here, and I think his bow goes something like this. And so like his other hand is right here, kind of fitting the arrow on his bow right there. I think this is a first-person perspective. It would have been nice to kind of see the bowstring or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what's entirely going on. There are silhouettes going on here that are unclear. It looks like maybe, you know, this figure here is maybe one of the Immortals from the movie 300. The comic book came first, by the way. And maybe this is a shield, a black shield right here. So some of the confusion that I have when I look at this scene is just his overuse of black and such like that. Like, these are all shields, I think. And then he kind of used Impressionism to kind of put in the Immortals into the scene. A lot of Impressionism went into this image, and silhouettes are an interesting way of doing Impressionism and yet still being able to put a good layer of realism into the image as well. So King Leonidas is right here, and his soldiers are all bundled up right here with all of their shields guarding the line. That is so cool. It's such an awesome illustration. So there are 17 images or panels on this page, and how many of them have a background? This one has the back right here. It's the only one that has a background. The scene's already been established. And I just think it's interesting how Frank Miller kind of sets himself up to draw really small compositions. And yet no one, I don't know if anyone ever called him on the carpet for it. I mean, what an interesting composition. I mean, like, it's as if he started out with just saying, I want to draw this picture right here. And it's like, okay, what if I put a panel down here? All right. You could kind of think of this as just a page with two panels, but like, I don't know, this one's kind of like split up into a bunch of other ones. Like, it's interesting because like it almost looks like an overlap of photographs, printed out photographs, kind of a mosaic. You have panels that overlap on top of other panels. You have panels that stagger. Notice how the narrowness of all of this going on through here, and then suddenly having this kind of bounce out like this. It staggers out. Puts an extra emphasis on his expression in this panel. It makes this panel look more important. So that would, like, I would consider this image to be a panel, the biggest panel on the page. So it would be what I would consider to be a capital panel. But I would also kind of consider this one to be a capital and this one to be a capital as well, because they cause a staggering effect. They put extra emphasis on different panels. It's interesting. Oh man, what a well done composition. Okay, I think this was made during Frank Miller's Daredevil run. I can't be 100% sure on that. I don't remember any of this, but this does look like Elektra to me. And you know, it's not like this earth-shattering composition, but look at this negative space. Now that would make, in my opinion, a kind of an inverted capital, because like these panels are bigger, and then you have a panel that's just going right through all of them, lower on the stacking order, that's going right through it all. What I find really interesting is that on these panels that are higher on the stacking order, he put the darkest values of the scene always on the side where there was overlap with the panel underneath all of these. And so it makes this nearly, like, except for this region right here, it makes this really unified composition that's going through here. Now, if he had somehow found a way to compose this scene to where this whole region was more shrouded in darkness, and instead of having his silhouette be in black, have it be in white, if he had managed to somehow done a composition like that, where there's a gradient going on, where it's super dark to the right of this panel, and just kind of gradients out, and his silhouette is in white, and all the details in the scene were done with white ink, it would have made this page look even better. But this use of negative space evokes a feeling. Now, I haven't read this specific issue, or at least I don't think I have, and so I'm not really quite sure what the emotion is planned for the scene, and I'm not really entirely sure of what's going on, except for somehow this guy trusts her enough to let her into his fancy house, or something. I'm not 100% sure. He maybe says something that pisses her off, and then she kills him, and I guess she feels something because she killed somebody. I don't know, Elektra is not really a sympathetic character to me, so I'm kind of like, if she feels something, I kind of don't care. She's still a psychopath. So, very interesting panel, very minimalistic, but like, I really like how the eye is just gravitated throughout this whole region. Very horizontal. And this negative space, what I think it allows you to do is to be able to look at her and look at this negative space and kind of see the image as a whole. Kind of like a moment of self-realization or something. And maybe that's what Frank Miller was going for as he was kind of directing the scene as the pencil artist, and probably the inking artist as well. He usually writes, draws, and inks his own work, which is some of the problem with his later work. It just he takes on so many duties that his work just looks sloppy, and it just looks like garbage nowadays. One thing that I really like about Jim Lee is his attention to detail. I mean, he rendered out these cars around here. That's phenomenal. He rendered out the ground. He's got a background in every single panel. But Jim Lee, I believe, he uses his backgrounds quite a bit as he's constructing a comic book. I think he uses 3D models and stuff. I think that's what helps him out in making such elaborate illustrations. And most comic book artists themselves, they'll draw out like a rough understanding of the scene usually, or just use a rough kind of 3D model to let another pencil artist know what they have in mind. And then after he draws Batman, and after he draws the Riddler and stuff like that, another pencil artist that's kind of learning under that comic book artist's tutelage will come in and draw in all of these details in the background. Now, I don't know for sure what Jim Lee's full workflow is, but it wouldn't surprise me either way. Jim Lee, he has such an amazing artistic style. I mean, he's absolutely phenomenal. Every time I see a Jim Lee piece of artwork, I'm just dumbfounded at how brilliant he is. It's not an amazing composition by any stretch of the imagination. There's nothing truly special about this panel, and this panel. They're all the same size, but, you know, the page does have a capital letter, which is this whole panel going on through all of this real estate right here. And so ultimately this is a vertical panel with 3 panels to the left of it. And very, very interesting. I like how he used verticality. There's an apex vanishing point somewhere up here off canvas, and it's just so phenomenal. In fact, I could probably find that vanishing point if I really wanted to. Let me just use the double star tool and give it just let's say a red fill. A red stroke. Give it a little bit of width, and all I need to do is get all of these vertical lines to kind of match up with one another right there. Okay. So the vanishing point for this panel is right up here, off canvas. This is where the vanishing point is. Okay? So it's causing you to look up at the scene. I would assume that the horizon line would be something like right here, and we have some perspective lines going off this direction, like that. So there's a vanishing point right here, and if I were to pull this double star out and press Ctrl J and just drag it out here, there's probably another vanishing point, okay? And all I'm doing in order to find out where these vanishing points are is I'm just following these lines out towards a vanishing point. These vertical lines, I just used the double star tool and just kind of sighted where the tool was in order to find out where these are. It's not really that hard to find out where your vanishing points are in a reference. You just need to follow your lines to where they wind up intersecting. You'll be able to find out where your vanishing points are. So if you're going to use a vertical panel, it seems like you need to use it intelligently. Like, you don't want to have the main points of interest be horizontal on a vertical panel. What I find interesting about all of this is how all of this are all like medium shots. While this is a close-up of his face, it's also kind of a wide shot over here. Kind of interesting how it all plays out. Okay, here's another Frank Miller piece. Oh, I just love this. This scene. You know he's in jail. There's a little bit of an establishing shot, but all he drew out was a box and just kind of split it up. He probably used measurements. He probably created this region right through here first. Probably found out where halfway was within this region, and that tells you where this middle beam is. Okay? And that allows him to be able to kind of flesh out these other faces a bit. And it also helps him find out the vertical bars to the scene. And so he would probably create an extension right here, okay? And that gives us the other tier up here. And if we needed to find this up here, all he'd need to do is just find out where center is down here and draw a vertical line going up. When I say vertical, there's a nadir vanishing point somewhere off canvas down below. Like, if you follow these lines out, eventually they will meet up somewhere down here-ish. Okay? So you kind of see where the perspective is. The vanishing point here, if you follow these lines, okay, so there's a vanishing point right here, and there's a vanishing point right here. Well, actually, it's probably more up here, but you get the point. It's not that difficult. So, like, he could just draw out the center here for this bar right here, and then draw out another extension, and then he has the position for his top tier up here. And now that, like, once he reaches this stage, he could start kind of dividing this front face up and then have yet another set of bars here. And I don't know how meticulous he was at finding all of the bars, but so far, from what you just saw, I do believe that the math does check out fairly well, which is, even with an image that's been illustrated with so much minimalism, you can see that just with what I've been doing with this panel, this big panel, this capital image here of a 2-page spread, as minimalistic as it is, there was a lot of math involved in making this image. Well, I mean, look at this. The bed that he's sitting on, it's just this a face, a perspective face. Like if we continue our lines out, it's like a vanishing point right here, and somewhere a vanishing point out here, right here, okay? And that's how he constructed just this face right here. And it's just one face. He didn't have to illustrate anything like a pillow right here. He didn't need to establish the mattress or anything like that. He didn't have to establish anything like a frame to the bed or anything like that. He just, a face, a perspective face. That's it. That's all he drew for the bed. The toilet, it looks like it's just just a box with a box on top of it, and a bit of a cylinder down here, and then another box, and then he probably just did impressionism for this little portion of the toilet. And, you know, it kind of gets me to kind of think that after... I think that maybe he may have sketched this out, and while the background was still a sketch, it kind of makes me think that he maybe got some tape, some masking tape or something, and with an X-Acto knife, maybe just made sure that he didn't tamper with this region, any of the regions where he might accidentally get ink, where there should be something like the bars to the prison. Okay, I think he may have actually put down some tape to mask it off, and then he comes in with a pen with a nib, and he goes ahead and he probably just goes ahead and pencils in and inks in this face here with so much minimalism. I mean, just look at that. Like, he's got a whole face that's kind of done with impressionism, but it's all shadows. It's nothing but shadows. That's all he needed to imply a face. And then he implies the neck with a shadow right there. Very interesting. And then he kind of implies that there's clothing just by allowing there to be these little streaks of white within the composition of just nothing but black. Just very fascinating how he would come about with this composition. Now, of course, most of us, I think, have seen the movie Sin City. We've seen this imagery before on camera, but the first time it had ever been seen was pretty much with Frank Miller in his comic book, Sin City. And very, very interesting. Yeah, like, I loved seeing it on camera, this style on camera. It was phenomenal. And I don't know why no one's using some of the visuals, the visual style that you saw inside of Sin City on camera. It's just like they used it for one movie and then they never use it again. I don't know why people can't recognize that there was brilliance there. I mean, why is it that they made that one movie and then everyone decides to keep making movies that are exactly like everybody else's movie? You would think that the industry would be more and more gravitating towards new ways of filmmaking. And sometimes it doesn't even necessarily need a new type of technology. It's just a new way for something to look on camera, and that's it. And Sin City, in my opinion, accomplished that, not just in the comic book, but on film. And notice how all of the panels, and there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 panels here. But notice how it looks like kind of a mosaic of printed out photographs on just resting on a desk. And to help kind of cement that a little bit, it has the text kind of doing the same behavior in the composition as well. Almost as if someone scrapbooked. Someone was doing scrapbooking and took photographs of this particular character and decided to put it in their scrapbook.
Hey, remember that time when you were in jail?
But ridiculousness aside, very well done. I mean, very well executed. It kind of illustrates that you don't need to always follow the strict rules of having every bit of panel layout be like a square page with nothing but a bunch of squares on it. You don't necessarily need to have panel layouts like this. You can decide to have a bit of a mosaic look to it, which I think is phenomenal. But I say that while still recognizing that Frank Miller is a stickler for oftentimes having a lot of panels on a page. For example, let's take this image as an example here. I mean, look at how many panels are on this page. Now, there is a capital letter here, a capital panel here, and it is right here. Okay, and how many backgrounds has he really actually drawn? Well, just one on this entire page, and kind of implies one in this panel right here, which is kind of cool. But for every comic book panel that looks like a mosaic, it seems as though Frank Miller has a lot of panels that are laid out exactly the way that I was describing earlier, where you have a page and you have a page layout that kind of looks like this, or something like this, or something that's kind of like that, where you have panel layouts like this. Like, of course, this is even more of a stickler, where there's 15 panels on one page. Having pages like this in Frank Miller's work, including Sin City, even though I've been showing you some really sensationalized images from that Sin City comic book, he had a lot of pages like this, okay? And this is from The Dark Knight Returns. What a great way of communicating information. Notice how inside of the panel here, like, he implies that we're watching on a TV screen just by having this kind of rounded bubble. It's like having a panel inside of a panel, and then he just draws this little tiny picture inside of that little tiny bubble there. Really well done. One of the tropes that Frank Miller likes to have is having the news anchors play a very big role in the storytelling. It's like having a narrator that isn't very accurate at representing the events. Okay, so this is another Frank Miller issue, and this issue kind of confuses me, or at least this page confuses me. Okay, so it looks like he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 backgrounds on this one page, which there's nothing to complain about there. And yes, you know, this kind of looks awesome, but what the hell is going on? I mean, Daredevil is not a giant like
Godzilla.
He's not
Godzilla
running through New York City, and yet that's what he sure looks like in this panel. So I don't like that panel. It's like, okay, establishing shot, nonsense, but they're in New York City. Okay, that's what I get from that first panel. Okay, so we get a bird's eye view of this scene. Very well done. It looks like the vanishing point is somewhere like down right here-ish. And, you know, I kind of think that the rest of this was just done kind of like isometric. There are no vanishing points to the left and to the right to construct the wall. It is 0-point perspective, I guess, is what it would be called. I haven't really talked about it because I just don't use it, but I may talk about isometric stuff. For the time being, Jazza has a good video on isometric drawings. Typically, the way he uses them is when he's doing game design. So if you're trying to make a video game like StarCraft, using isometric perspective is very effective. And as you can tell from this panel, I mean, it's a dynamic image. I mean, there is a vanishing point in it, but it's not beholden to every single rule, and it's using elements from both isometric and kind of 3-point perspective, but officially just 1-point perspective with isometric applications for this second panel here. I really like this second panel. There's not much detail to it, but it doesn't really need to have it. Okay, so here's my big question about panel 1 and panel 3. Is this what his pose is in panel 3? I mean,
that's just so stupid.
I mean, you would think that if that was the case, it would be more like boot would be like right here, and then his calf would start getting bigger or something, and then you would think that his other foot would be something like right here, and then like his torso would be much closer to us, and then his head he would probably be looking down at him right there, and you know, his arms would probably be like that. Yeah, like a super rough sketch of what I think his pose would be in panel 3 would be something like that. But instead we get this Godzilla effect that makes no sense in either panel 1 or panel 3. So I would say, yes, graphic designing your panel layouts is cool, but not when it makes absolute stupidity like panel 1 and panel 3. Okay? I'm glad that Frank Miller made this page the way he did, because, you know, I'm glad that he was willing to experiment. Not all of your experiments are going to succeed, and I would say that this was definitely not a success. Panel 1 and panel 3 look like dog crap. Okay, and this is a cool panel right here. Okay, panel 4, I'm pretty sure that he pretty much just lined out the page just by kind of sketching out the silhouette of the poses And then he's like, okay, well, you know, if the street lamp is right here and I drew out this silhouette like that, if this street lamp is in front of him, then the light source is coming like right here. So all I need is just a little bit of highlight here, here, here. And at that point, some people would just pull out the fill tool during these days and then just fill it in like that. Of course, you know, I'm not really set up to be drawing, but that would ultimately, it'd be that quick nowadays to make an illustration like this. Yeah, and once again, you know, I'm pretty sure he just drew out a silhouette. I'm pretty sure that this entire composition for this panel took very little time. And then, you know, he probably drew out the DD for Daredevil, the eyes, and a little red highlight here and here. And then, you know, just decided to pull out a brush and then just kind of ink it really quick. Like, this took hardly any time to make. I almost guarantee it. If your silhouette just looks good, then why not go with it, especially if the lighting in the scene allow you to actually not need that much detail. Now, I say that while it does kind of look like somebody came in after the fact and cross-hatched all of this, but other than all of these little tiny cross-hatching, all that really needed to happen was some thick, bold lines, and then a thin one. The thick, bold lines to communicate shadow, and then the thinner ones kind of communicate, you know, that's just an edge to an object. And notice how these thick black lines, they do not intrude upon the silhouette of Daredevil. Look at that. Even these thin ones, these lines here, they do not intrude on the space of the Daredevil silhouette. Isn't that interesting? And a minimalistic drawing of New York City. I guess he's standing on a gargoyle or laying down on a gargoyle. It would have kind of been interesting if he had a little martini here and he was kind of drinking a toast up there, but I guess that's probably not his character to do something like that. It almost looks like a vacation image. Like, just make believe for just a second that it was a woman with her head thrown back here, okay? And then you stick in an airplane right here, and it's kind of a terribly drawn airplane. And in a way, if you got your composition just right, you could actually really envision it being a promotional advertisement for something like American Airlines or something like that. Kind of interesting. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. I know that I haven't had a video like this before on my channel. If you guys are interested in seeing more like this from time to time, feel free to leave a comment in the video description below. If you'd like to get more notifications from me or have more participation with my community, there's a link to my Twitter or my Discord in the video description below. And if you'd like to support this channel, there's an image of my mascot in the upper right corner of the screen right now. It leads to my Patreon. Any support would be much appreciated. If you've enjoyed this content and you'd like to see more, feel free to click on anything else that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.